I ran the numbers for the 100th time. I was on track. The spreadsheet said I was going to be fine. And I closed the laptop and felt, well, nothing. No relief or excitement, just the quiet dread that maybe the number I've been chasing for years wasn't actually the thing I was afraid of not having. It was 2022. Markets were falling off a cliff, and I was doing what the strategy told me to do, transferring money into my investment account like clockwork every single month. Watching it land, then watching it disappear. Transferring more, watching that disappear too. One Friday specifically, I just made my monthly contribution, a few $1,000s, move from my savings account into the portfolio. And an hour later, well, the portfolio was down more than I just put in. Not over a matter of days, but in the space of an hour. I sat there staring at the screen thinking, what am I doing? I'm showing up to a corporate job I don't love. I'm grinding through the weeks and saving aggressively, doing everything the plan says I should do. And the number is going backwards. It felt like running on a treadmill someone kept making steeper and steeper and steeper. But here's what cracked something open that day. The drop? It was 2%. That's it. 2% on a Friday. But my chest was tight, and I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I'd opened the app 3 times in an hour, not to check the number, but just to look for some feeling of safety that the number couldn't give me. And if any of that sounds familiar right now in 2026, well, yeah, we'll get to that. But this is the part that messed with me. You can have enough money or be well on your way to enough money and still not feel like you have enough, because somewhere between your spreadsheet and your nervous system, the message isn't getting through. I've talked before about financial enough, which is the number. I've talked about identity enough. That's knowing who you are beyond your career. And purpose enough, having something meaningful to walk towards. But there's a pillar underneath all of them that I think is the hardest to build and the easiest to ignore. I'm calling it emotional enough. This is the scarcity mindset that money alone can't fix. And I think it's the reason some people hit their number and feel free, whilst others hit their exact same number and feel nothing but dread. This episode is about the gap between having enough and feeling enough, where it comes from, and then what to do about it. You've built the career, you're building the portfolio, you're close to freedom, so what now? Welcome to Life After Enough, money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. I'm Nick, I'm racing towards early retirement and figuring out who I become when the job no longer dictates what I do with my time. Let's get into it. There's a moment in the FIRE journey that nobody prepares you for. You hit a milestone. Maybe it's your first $100,000. Maybe it's Coast-Fi. Maybe it's the actual number itself. And you expect to feel something, relief, joy, safety, permission, something. But what you actually feel is, I don't know, not much. Indifference, or worse, you feel the same low-grade anxiety you've always felt, just with more zeros on the screen. I remember the day I hit my original FIRE number and realized my investments were generating more in monthly returns than what my old monthly expenses were. And that's a significant line to cross. On paper, that's the beginning of freedom. However, in my body, I felt like absolutely nothing had changed. I still felt the same worries about the number being enough when I opened my banking app, the same reluctance to spend on things that didn't feel productive, the same mental arithmetics at restaurants, calculating whether this meal or boozy brunch was really worth it. To be honest, I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I'd miscalculated, or that I needed a bigger buffer, or that the market was about to crash and I was the only one who could see it coming. But nothing was wrong with the maths. Something was wrong with the wiring inside of me. So here's what I've come to understand in the time since then. Your financial plan lives in your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. But your sense of safety and security, well, that lives in your amygdala or nervous system. Those two systems don't talk to each other nearly as well as you'd think. Your rational brain can look at a portfolio and say, this is sufficient, the withdrawal rate is sustainable, I'm covered for 30 years with a generous buffer. But your nervous system can look at the exact same information and say, but what if it isn't? What if something goes wrong? What if this is the moment everything falls apart? The nervous system doesn't care about safe withdrawal rates. It cares about pattern recognition. It remembers the time you were broke. It remembers the relationship that fell apart and took your financial stability with it. It remembers your parents arguing about money when you were a kid. It remembers the redundancy round at work that didn't take you that time, but might take you next time. All of those experiences left a kind of residue, and that residue doesn't get cleaned up by compound interest calculations. It gets cleaned up by a completely different kind of work, emotional work that most high achievers have spent their entire lives avoiding by just earning more money. An easy way to conceptualize this is to think of it as a scarcity mindset hangover. Even though the actual financial scarcity might be over, the emotional scarcity is still running the show. You see it everywhere once you know what to look for. The person with $2 million in the bank who still can't bring themselves to fly business class, not because they've decided it's not worth it, that would be a rational choice, but because spending that much money on a flight makes them feel physically anxious. Or the retiree who checks their portfolio every single morning like a patient checking their own vital signs. And the couple who've hit their number but keep working just one more year because the thought of actually stopping triggers a panic attack they can't explain. None of these people have a financial problem. They have an emotional one. No amount of recalculating or remodeling or adding a buffer to a buffer to a buffer is going to fix it, because the problem isn't in the spreadsheet. It's actually inside you, in the body. There's a version of this that's even harder to talk about. Financial independence can create emotional distance, whether that's from your partner, your friends, or even from your own life. This is when you're so focused on protecting the number that you stop being present with the people the number was supposed to be for. You know, this is when your partner suggests a holiday and your first thought isn't excitement, it's what's the cost. When a friend asks you for dinner and you're mentally calculating whether it fits within the budget, even though the budget has more than enough room. And it's when your husband says, let's just enjoy this, and you can't, because some part of you is already running the compound interest calculator on what this moment is costing your future. That isn't financial discipline. That's financial independence becoming emotional isolation. Quick one before we continue. I send a weekly email every Monday morning that goes deeper than the podcast. It's not a recap, it's a separate idea, usually something more personal, plus a question to sit with for the week. It's free, it's one email, and you can sign up at lifeafterenough.com. Link is in the show notes. Okay, back to it. Every one of us inherited a relationship with money before we ever earned a penny of our own. It came from watching and from listening, from absorbing the emotional climate in our households around the subject of money. Maybe money was a source of tension. Maybe it was never discussed at all, which teaches you that it's something shameful or dangerous. Maybe one parent was a spender and the other a saver, and you grew up in the crossfire. Maybe you watch someone you love lose everything, and you internalize the lesson that financial safety is always temporary. These aren't conscious beliefs. You don't walk around thinking, I believe money is dangerous because my parents argued about it in 1995. But the belief is still there. It's running in the background, shaping every financial decision you make. The really insidious part is that these beliefs often masquerade as prudence. You're not anxious, you're just careful. You're not scared, you're just realistic. You're not hoarding, you're just being prepared. Sometimes those things are true, but sometimes careful is just fear in disguise. There's a specific version of this that I think applies to a lot of people listening to this show, because it also applied to me. If you're a high achiever, the kind of person who ended up in a well-paying career, who optimizes and plans and sets targets and hits them, there's a decent chance that your drive wasn't built purely on ambition alone. Some of it was built on anxiety, the need to prove yourself, the need to feel safe, the need to be so good, so prepared, so far ahead that nothing bad could catch you. That engine works brilliantly for accumulation. Anxiety is rocket fuel for saving. It makes you optimize every penny, max out every pension, build buffer after buffer after buffer, and the FIRE community even celebrates it. High savings rates, aggressive timelines, lean budgets. We frame it as discipline, as financial literacy, as winning. But the engine that gets you to enough is then not the engine that lets you enjoy enough when you reach it. Because the anxious part of you doesn't have an easy off switch. It doesn't just look at the number and say, "Great, we did it. Stand down." It does what it's good at, what you've trained it to do. It looks at the number and says, "What if it's not enough? What about inflation? What about a market crash? What about healthcare costs in 30 years' time? What about? The same anxiety that drove you to build wealth now drives you to never feel safe spending it. And no one talks about this. No one points out that, hey, the personality trait that made you great at saving money might also be the one that prevents you from ever feeling like you have enough money. And it changes your career in ways you don't expect as well. Financial independence is supposed to give you freedom at work, the ability to say no, to take risks, or even to walk away. But if your emotional wiring is still running on scarcity, well, you don't feel free. You feel more trapped. Because now you're not just working for money, you're working to protect a number that your nervous system says is never quite safe enough. The career you are supposed to be free from becomes the thing you can't let go of. Not because you need it, but because leaving it feels like stepping off a cliff. This concept is so undeniably true in my own life. It just makes me laugh. The closer I get to the big number, the more reasons I invent to put more space between me and the life I've been so desperately chasing. It drives my husband mad, but I do it, and it's something I'm still working on. For some people, and I'll put my hand up as well, there's a specific financial shock that left a mark, a moment where the rug was pulled out from underneath you. If you heard the origin story in episode 9, you know what mine was. I had a whole career before this one, career 1.0, corporate law in London, good money, impressive on paper, and I spent most of it trying to numb the pain of a life that didn't feel like mine. Dinners, holidays, mountain expeditions, whatever took the edge off. I wasn't reckless per se, I just wasn't paying attention. I was earning well and spending almost all of it, because the spending was the only part of that life I actually enjoyed. When I finally quit to do what I loved, personal training and mountain leading, work that actually felt like mine, the money ran out. Not things got tight, it actually ran out. I had to go back to the career I'd left, start again from scratch, and rebuild everything. And that experience left a very specific mark. It taught me that financial stability can just vanish overnight, that the life you've built can collapse under you if you're not watching the numbers. And when I came back to corporate life and started rebuilding towards financial independence, I made a promise to myself. I will never be in that position again. That promise has been fantastically useful. It's driven discipline, my savings rate, and my entire FIRE journey. But it's also hardwired something deeper. A fear that no amount of money has ever been able to fully switch off. Because the part of me that remembers being broke doesn't trust the spreadsheet. It trusts the feeling. And the feeling says it could all disappear again. And I've got to hold on tight to Career 2.0 for as long as possible. Now, I'm not saying all of this to be dramatic. I'm saying it because I think a lot of people chasing financial independence are partly running from a specific moment in their past as well. And until you turn around and look at that moment honestly in the face, the running doesn't stop. You'll just keep running with a bigger portfolio. I want to get specific about what this looks like in daily life, because when it's yours, you normalize it. You think everyone lives this way, but they don't. It looks like checking your portfolio when you know nothing has changed. Not because you need the information, but because you need the reassurance. The reassurance lasts about 45 minutes before you need it again. It looks like running the numbers one more time, remodeling the same scenario with a slightly different inflation assumption, a slightly worse sequence of returns, a slightly longer time horizon. Not because the previous model was wrong, but because the act of modeling is how you self-soothe. It looks like guilt when you spend on something that isn't necessary, when you can comfortably afford it, even when you budgeted for it. There's a quiet voice that says that money could have been invested. That's X years of growth you just spent on a holiday. It looks like just one more year syndrome. You hit your number, and instead of stepping into the life you planned, you just move the goalposts. Just a little more buffer, a little more certainty, just one more year of income to be safe. And then another, and another, and you start to wonder if you'll ever actually feel ready. It looks like comparison, scrolling fire forums and seeing someone with a bigger number and a lower withdrawal rate, a more diversified portfolio, and feeling a spike of inadequacy, even though your own plan is perfectly sound. And the worst part is that no one around you will think you have a problem because from the outside, you look like the person being responsible. You're the careful one. You're being smart. Financial independence gave you options. Emotional insufficiency, however, has made you unable to take any of them. If you recognize yourself in any of that, you likely have an emotional system that hasn't caught up with your financial reality. And thankfully, that's a solvable problem. Quick pause. If this episode is sparking something for you, hit follow so you don't miss what's coming next. Feel free to share it with someone who'd love it too. It really helps the show to grow. Okay, so building emotional enough. The first step, I think, to do this, from my perspective, is embarrassingly simple, but it's also genuinely hard. It's to try and notice what you're feeling when you interact with money and name it. So this isn't what you're thinking, but what you're feeling, and there is a difference. I think the market might drop further. That's a thought. The tight chest, the shallow breathing, the compulsion to open the app again, well, that's the feeling. And the feeling is the thing that's actually driving your behavior. When I started paying attention to this, I was really surprised by how often my financial decisions were actually emotional decisions. I tell myself I was rebalancing my portfolio because of a strategic shift in my allocation, but the truth was I'd read a scary headline and I was anxious and I needed to do something, anything, to try and regain a feeling of control. Just noticing this and catching yourself in the act of confusing a feeling with a financial decision, it won't make the feeling go away, but it does create a gap between the feeling and the action. And in that gap is where emotional enough starts to grow. The next one is to separate the past from the present. Here's a question. When you feel anxious about money, are you actually responding to today's situation or are you responding to a memory? Because a lot of the time, the anxiety isn't about the now, it's about the then. It's the echo of a time you were financially vulnerable, playing on a loop. As I've mentioned in other episodes, your nervous system can't tell the difference between a genuine current threat and a remembered one. It responds the same way to both. I know this because I lived it. When I ran out of money after Career 1.0, it left a template in my nervous system that financial stability is temporary. Don't trust it. And for years afterwards, even as the numbers climbed, even as the portfolio grew, that template was still running. Every market dip triggered the same alarm because my body remembered a time when it was. Recognizing this doesn't require therapy, but it does require honesty. When you feel the spike of money anxiety, ask yourself, is this about right now, or is this something that already happened? If your bank account is healthy, your portfolio is on track, and your expenses are covered, and you're still afraid, well, that's probably old fear. It's real and it's valid, but it's not about today. Then the other thing you can do is to try and understand the promise you made yourself. This is the piece I didn't understand for a long time. When you go through a financial shock, whether it's running out of money or losing a job or watching your parents struggle, you make a promise to yourself. You might not even say it out loud, but it's there. Mine was, I will never be in that position again. Never broke, never dependent, never that vulnerable. And the promise becomes the engine. It drives the saving, the discipline, the relentless forward motion. It's the reason you're on the fire path in the first place. The promise works. But the promise doesn't know when to stop. It doesn't have a finish line because never again is an infinite commitment. There's no number that satisfies never. There's no portfolio size that makes never feel complete. You can have 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, and the promise is still running, still scanning for danger, still whispering, but what if? The work of emotional enough isn't about breaking the promise. The promise served you. It got you here, but it's also about recognizing that the promise was made by a version of you who was scared and vulnerable, and asking whether that promise is still the right operating system for someone who now isn't. The next thing you can do is to build evidence of safety. Your rational brain already has the evidence. The spreadsheet is the evidence, but your nervous system needs a different kind of proof. It needs lived experience. This is one of the things my sabbatical taught me. 6 months off, not earning any money. 6 months of watching the savings go down instead of up. And at the end of it, well, I was fine. Completely, boringly fine. The sky didn't fall in. The portfolio didn't implode. I came back to work and the numbers had barely moved. That experience did more for my emotional relationship with money than any amount of modeling, because my body got to actually experience what my spreadsheet had been telling me for years. There is enough. You can stop. You can spend. You can take time, and you'll still be okay. I'm not saying you need to take a 6-month sabbatical to build emotional enough, but you do need some version of proof that lives in your experience, not just in your calculations. It could be a month off, or a big purchase that doesn't destroy you, or a lower period of income that turns out to be fine. These experiences teach your nervous system what your spreadsheet can't. And then the final thing is to stop using optimization as a coping mechanism. This one's for the spreadsheet people, the ones who, when they feel anxious, they don't panic. They model, they add another tab, they run another scenario, they find a new tool or calculator or blogger and rederive the number from a different set of assumptions. I see you because I am you. Modeling can be useful, but when you're modeling the same question for the 15th time, you're not doing financial planning. You're managing your own anxiety. And the relief you get from the new model will last about as long as the relief from the last one. If your number hasn't changed, your expenses haven't changed, and your income hasn't changed, and you're still modeling, close the laptop. Go for a walk. Call someone. Do anything other than seek reassurance from a spreadsheet that's already told you the answer. The spreadsheet here is not the problem. The need to keep asking is. So let me bring all of this together. Financial enough is the maths. You need the maths. The maths matters, and I'm not dismissing it. But financial enough without emotional enough is like building a beautiful house and never feeling safe inside of it. You have the keys, but you're still sleeping with one eye open. Emotional enough is the work of learning to feel safe with what you have. Not reckless or naive, but genuinely in your bones safe. It's the ability to check your portfolio and close the app without a second thought, to spend on something joyful without running the compound interest calculation on what that money could have done. To hear about a market downturn and feel concern, but not terror. To stop working because you've chosen to, not because someone gave you permission. It's the quietest pillar of enough, but I think it might be the most important one, because all of the others, the financial plan, the purpose, and identity work, they all depend on your ability to actually receive what you've built, to let it in, to trust it. Financial independence gives you the numbers, but emotional enough gives you the permission to actually live the life those numbers were supposed to buy. And that's something you can't calculate. It's something you have to practice. So here's what I'd ask you to do after this episode if this resonated with you. The next time you feel a spike of financial anxiety, the compulsion to check the market, or the guilt after spending, or the urge to recalculate, just take a moment and pause. Don't act on it. Just notice it. Ask yourself, is this about today? Is something actually wrong right now? Or is this just an old feeling that's still running? You don't need to fix it in that moment. You just need to see it. Because the gap between the feeling and the action, that's where freedom actually starts. Not in the spreadsheet, but in that gap. Thanks for listening to Life After Enough, a podcast about money, meaning, and the life you design when work becomes optional. If this episode made you rethink your future, share it with someone who's starting to question the script too. You can follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Nick, and I'll see you next week as we keep building a life that's truly ours.